Plastics. We're told that one word in the movie The Graduate. There's a great future in plastics. Plastics are indeed incredibly useful, but nowadays we're often shamed into embarrassment for using these. So today's science question of the day is, how bad is a plastic bag, especially in relative terms to other types of reusable bags that we might be carrying around? Specifically, how many times am I going to have to reuse my reusable bag to go ahead and offset it with the cost of the plastic bag? So before we dive into the details, we're going to do our TLDR first, our key takeaways. So the first one is reuse your bags, whatever type of material content that they're made out of, as many times as you can. Plastic, paper, standard cloth reusable. For your standard cloth reusable bags, you're gonna probably have to use these at least 11 times and maybe up to 22 times before you hit that break-even point with the plastic bag. So please keep this in mind as you're visiting the grocery store. If you're like me, you'll often show up to the grocery store impromptu and not have your reusable bag with you. And if you're also like me, don't go ahead and just buy the next reusable bag unless you really need it, because you're going to be using that 11 to 22 times before you hit that break-even point. So consider going ahead and just getting that disposable bag and trying to remember your best to get your reusable bag and bring it to the store next time. Paper bags. Interesting note, paper bags are worse than plastic bags in terms of their full life cycle as well as their global warming potential. So you're gonna have to use your paper bag 3 to 4 times in order to hit that break-even point with the plastic bag. So try to go ahead and hit those number of reuses, and then also consider shopping at places that sell bags with 100% recycled content. Thirdly, reuse your plastic bag. Try to use your plastic bag for things like packing your lunch and taking out the trash, things that you might buy a new plastic bag for. So if you can reuse your plastic bag, you're going to go ahead and offset that environmental impact of your plastic bag. So that's the TLDR. Let's go ahead and dive into the details. So to answer today's science question of the day, I looked at a number of life cycle assessments of different types of reusable bags. Life cycle assessments are also known as a cradle to grave analysis, which analyzes the environmental impact of a product from the stages of its inception, the acquisition of those materials, its manufacturing, through production, and then eventually end of life of that product. So let's go ahead and look at a few of the different types of bags that were considered in our life cycle assessments. The first is your classic plastic bag. This one has a nice environmental logo written on it to remind us to recycle, reuse, and reduce. This one is made out of HDPE, so we're going to consider plastic bags really of this variety that are made of high-density polyethylene. Secondly, we have our reusable bag, our classic reusable bag here. This I obtained from my local grocery store. This one is made out of non-woven polypropylene. And then thirdly, we have our standard paper bag. You don't know what this looks like. This one here is actually made out of 100% recycled content. So if we consider a non-woven polypropylene bag, how many times am I going to have to reuse this bag, given that it's going to be more environmentally impactful to make this bag and then end up disposing of it eventually than my plastic bag? Well, studies were a little bit different in their analysis and their assumptions. So some, for example, considered carrying capacity, whereas others didn't. Some considered certain types of environmental impact factors, whereas others considered other impact factors, things like global warming potential, water depletion, ecotoxicity, and other types of environmental impact factors. And then thirdly, some considered different types of end of life, recycling, incineration, etc. So given that there was a little bit of variability in how these studies were done, I feel comfortable saying that you'd have to use my standard non-woven polypropylene bag at least 11 times and as much as 22 times to hit that break-even point with the plastic bag. What about my paper bag? So if you listen to the TLDR, you know that a paper bag is going to, over its life, take more energy than a standard plastic bag. That was news to me. And I'm gonna have to use my paper bag 3 to 4 times before I hit that break-even point with the plastic bag. Now, as soon as I use my plastic bag once more, instead of purchasing a new plastic bag, that's gonna change the number of times that I have to reuse my reusable bag to go ahead and meet that break-even point. So for paper bags, this now bumps up to 5 times for reuse, and for your non-woven polypropylene bag, that jumps up to 44 times for reuse. So that's not to say that you shouldn't use reusable bags, but just make sure that you are reusing them. And then if you have plastic bags, don't feel terrible, but also try to reuse those. So that's if I care about all impact factors equally. If I care about just global warming, for example, we'd want to compare the life cycle as it pertains to global warming potential. So the data is actually pretty similar, and I'd have to use my paper bag 4 times and my NWPP bag about 13 times to go ahead and hit that break-even point for the global warming potential as it relates to that plastic bag. So definitely worse materials are, for example, polyethylene. I have an example of a bag here. This one's even made out of recycled polyethylene, but this one is actually worse than non-woven polypropylene, as well as paper, as well as plastic. And then cotton bags are actually also really bad, useful, sturdy, etc. But you're gonna have to use those a lot of times before you hit that break-even point with a plastic bag. What about compostable bags? I often go to my local organic store and get a compostable bag. I think I have one here. And often feel great about myself. I'm gonna go home and put my compost in it and then throw it in the compost bin. What about the comparison of this type of bag with respect to a plastic bag? So in terms of the cost to make this bag and the environmental impact, this is actually gonna be worse than a plastic bag. Over the course of the life of this bag, however, the jury's still out on this one. I didn't find enough studies that were really definitively reporting on the full life cycle analysis of a compostable bag. One thing is really important to note, though, that you should really try to get your compostable materials in true composting conditions. One study noted that it took 20 weeks for a compostable bag to compost down to 84% of the way. Another thing to note is that none of the studies that I looked at accounted for plastic as litter. It turns out that plastic bags as litter account for less than 1% of litter overall. That's not to say that it's not important to think about the overall effects of plastic and litter in the environment. One study that I found recently reported that marine areas off the coast of Hawaii, which are known to be harboring developing aquatic life, showed that pieces of plastic outnumbered baby fish by 7 to 1, and showed that these baby fish were also ingesting the plastic at a very high rate. So our final takeaways: 1, reuse your bags as many times as you can, regardless of what material they are. 2, for your reusable bags, make sure you wash these. Bacteria can linger here and affect our health. And then 3, make sure that those plastic bags really end up in the trash and not as litter. So that's it for Science Question of the Day. Thank you for listening.